Vietnam, the Marines retake the ancient city of Hue after a month of bloody, house-to-house fighting. The once beautiful city is destroyed in the process. The price in human lives is terrible. Later, we learned just how terrible. When the communists first took over, they executed 3,000 civilians. We didn't see that on television. What we saw and heard was that in 1 week, 542 Americans were killed in Vietnam. There were just too many bodies to ignore. Newspapers began to change their minds editorially. Doubts about Vietnam began to spread. The next to doubt was CBS anchorman Walter Cronkite.
I went to Dick Salant, who was our president of CBS News, and said, you know, I think that maybe it's time for one of us, and I'd like to be the one who does it, goes out there and says just what it looks like to a reasonably astute, informed observer.
Cronkite and his crew travel around Vietnam. He interviews officials, officers, and soldiers. And then on February 27th, in a primetime news special, Walter Cronkite said what had to be said.
I was going to have to say that I didn't think we were winning in Vietnam, that the Viet Cong offensive, the North Vietnamese offensive, indicated we were not in the position that we thought we were before the Tet Offensive. So I put together my piece, and at the end of the factual report, I said, I'm going to take off that hat now, factual reporter. I'm going to deliver a rare thing in these columns, a commentary.
When Cronkite came back and pointed out the flaws that he saw, it had an impression on Johnson, most certainly did. Well, I remember him telling me words to the effect, if we've lost Walter Cronkite, we're going to lose a whole lot of people.
One thing Lyndon Johnson was always good at was counting, or so he believed. That is Eugene McCarthy. He's the politician who said being in politics is like being in football. You have to be smart enough to understand the game and dumb enough to think it's important. What he meant was that he could count too. Come back to 1968, to the electronic battlefield of New Hampshire. Or is that a football field? Either way, bring your mittens. It gets real windy up there, even outdoors.
Come back to Our World and Winds of Change in the winter of '68.
Welcome back to 1968. Our story takes place between the end of January and the end of March. It's about war and television. The Vietnam War is being fought on television, also the war to end the war, several political wars, and one ski slope war. No wonder a kind of performance reality has evolved, one where image counts at least as much as truth. Of course, a notion like that can get you in trouble because, as Lyndon Johnson once pointed out, while you're saving your face, you're losing your ass. He did not speak from ignorance.
One place where performance reality evolved and where image counted more than truth was the psychedelic saloon, for want of a better phrase. Places like Fillmore East, which opened that winter in New York City, were concert stages where kids could come and drink a 7-Up, maybe sneak a joint or a tab of LSD, and watch the Doors or the Grateful Dead or an artist like Janis Joplin singing as if her heart would break or her larynx. It was a distortion of sound, of mind, and many of our kids embraced it because they had looked at the real world and didn't like what they saw. And some very straight establishment adults looked at the war in Vietnam that winter when the winds of change were blowing and changed their minds. One was the brand new Secretary of Defense.
I, Clark M. Clifford,
do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
Clark Clifford has been a trusted advisor to presidents, Democratic presidents, for 20 years, and he's known to be a strong supporter of Johnson's Vietnam policy.
I reflected what the public reflected, and that was that we were prevailing and that almost any time the war would be over.
But in his first few weeks in office, Clifford's view of the war and Johnson's policies takes a dramatic turn.
I can't tell you how many hours in what is known as the tank with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I couldn't find out what our plan was for victory in Vietnam. The reason I couldn't find out was we didn't have any. And it was at that time that I changed my entire opinion of the war in Vietnam.
What a field day for the heat. 1,000 people in the street, singing the songs and the carry inside.
Then there are those who don't think we ought to be fighting this war in the first place, and have been saying so for some time now. Not all of them are males of an age to be drafted. Not all of them are young. In '68, the young are divided too, and not just by the war. Here is one side. Here's the other side, psychedelic, and even if you didn't drop acid, LSD, the music could often make you feel as if you did. Jefferson Airplane. Paul Kantner played guitar for the Airplane.
I don't want to glorify drugs, but in '68, early '68 anyway, drugs were still relatively cool in the society. In those days, drugs were almost not the main thing. They were just an attendant sacrament almost to the wonder that you were experiencing.
But by March, the counterculture is a consumer item, and its chief capitalist is poster artist Peter Max. His work shows up on posters, but also on motor scooters, even a line of clocks by General Electric.
But this way I'm able to give art to the people, to my friends on this planet.
There was no strategy on my end to capitalize, and so maybe I was the most withered person at the time visually, and so all the corporations wanted to take my works and apply them on their stuff.
We'll ride on the rain, we'll sail on your touch, I'll talk to your eyes that I love so much.
Rod McEwen, call him the capitalist of romance. This gravelly-voiced singer and poet releases an incredible 4 albums between February and March. Good vibes are big business.
Well, it's odd because all of a sudden your name's in public domain. I mean, on the one hand, it's a big treat to wake up in the morning without knowing anything about it in advance and find yourself in Peanuts or Pogo.
And his book, Listen to the Warm, is a bestseller. How does it sound today?
Is Love collective? Not anymore, it's not. We're lucky if it lives above the jukebox bleat. And so when I think of love and loving, I think of people dying alone for lack of love. These are the days of the dancing, 6 feet apart. Discotheque has tapped that time of loving into time. Mr. Roebuck still likes Mr. Sears. Abercrombie's stuck with Fitch all these years. There must be others out there somewhere. But where?
Certainly not at Khe Sanh. Since the Tet Offensive began in January, some 6,000 Marines have been pinned down at this outpost. They are steadily bombarded by rockets and mortar fire. They are surrounded by 20,000 North Vietnamese regular troops, under siege and waiting. Jeff Gralnick is covering Khe Sanh for CBS News.
Once siege mentality had settled in, the Marines there were, in effect, live bait. What the military wanted, what the military felt it needed, was a set-piece battle.
In Washington, Lyndon Johnson is obsessed with holding Khe Sanh. He has a scale model of the base in the White House, and he has pledged that Khe Sanh will never be another Dien Bien Phu, the decisive defeat that drove the French out of Vietnam in 1954 and whose anniversary is approaching. Meanwhile, the Marines at Khe Sanh wait.
You couldn't approach Khe Sanh except by air. C-123s were being shot down, C-130s were being blown up on the runway, helicopters were being shot down, C-130s had come in at 500 feet, dropped stuff all over what was left of the runway, and then hightail it up and out of the way.
When the weather is clear, the fury of American air power is called to the hills surrounding the base. Newsweek says it best, the agony of Khe Sanh.